you need to be open, because the journey and the process of developing a company, you're going to learn. And so you need to also be, as I'm trying to teach athletes, to be adaptable to change on a dynamic environment. So as a business person, you need to be adaptable to change, and don't always be too headstrong. Sometimes, you have to be a little bit headstrong, because you sometimes a lot of people are not going to believe in you or what you're doing. In that manner you do, but where they're, listen to the advice of others and take that where you feel it needs to be incorporated. Don't be too closed in that regard.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Salvatore LoDuca. And Salvatore, or as he goes by Sal, during high school was geared towards the sciences. So his dad always wanted him to become a doctor, but he had a creative personality as well. And so he went into school or into college and went into pre-med for a couple of years. After that, decided pre-med wasn't for him. So switched colleges, transferred majors or switched majors to economics, and decided to go into more business, and had an opportunity to work with his father, I think, during those years as well for a period of time. Went also got an MBA, and then decided to go to law school. Came back to New York, passed the bar, and then went to work for a couple firms. Also worked with his dad on real estate for a period of time. Had a couple kids, or got married. I was going to say had a couple or marriages, but I meant to say have a couple kids. Got married, had a couple kids. Never got into sports but as our dad, or because his dad didn't see it as a career, but got into it more with his kids as they started to get into sports. And so he had a kid that was recovering from cancer, and got onto getting him back onto the baseball field. Started to look into the human movements and kinesiology, and went into the idea of motor sports with hand-eye coordination. Some of the other things, looked at robotics, and had a few companies that have spawned from that. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Sal.
Thank you, Devin. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So now I just took a much longer journey and unpacked it into a very short snippet. So let's unpack that a bit and tell us a bit of how your journey got started in high school, as your dad wanted you to become a doctor.
Well, it's really funny, as you were giving the intro. A lot of times I say to people that, in the moment when you're younger, whether you're in high school or sometimes you're in college and you're not sure what it is that you want to do, life sometimes comes full circle. So the things that at the time you're learning and you're thinking, oh, like, when am I ever going to use this? It comes back. It really does. So learning, education is never, ever wasted, even if you feel at the time that it may not be pertinent or may not be useful at any point in your life, but it'll come back, and you'll be thankful that, or you might say, I should have listened more in that math class or science class. But yeah, so starting from, as you mentioned, starting from high school, I was, my father came here from Italy at a young age. He didn't have very much education, so education was really important to him. And so, back then, the concept of what was a good education, what were good jobs to strive for, were, becoming a doctor or a scientist, or, any one of those type of careers. And so, I went along with it. And so, I did well. I was a good student. I think when people talk about serial entrepreneurs these days, I think I was a good serial student at the time. But in any event, so I was good in the sciences. I did like the sciences, but I didn't, it was at some point by my second year in college, I'm like, you know what? I don't think this is really for me. And so I sort of switched over to the next best thing, which was business. I graduated from college with an economics degree.
Now,
I
just
started.
one question on that before we get too far. So, I mean, because you started out, you went to pre-med for a couple of years before switching over to economics and business. Kind of what was it after those couple of years that you just figured out that it wasn't for you? Is it just, hey, I don't enjoy the classes, or I just can't envision myself doing this, or I hate the sight of blood, or kind of what was it that kind of decided, okay, I need to shift gears to pursue something that I'll hopefully more enjoy throughout my career?
Well, one day I'm just thinking in terms of, that was a phase in your life where you start to really, as you're in the middle of college and now you're sort of in that transition phase where you're no longer a kid anymore. And you got to start thinking about, like, what am I going to do with my life when I get out of college, or what's the roadmap here? And since I don't see myself as a doctor, and so I better switch gears now before I finish college. And so and at least begin that roadmap, so to speak, because if I continue this way, I'm wasting my dad's money, I'm wasting my time, and so I'm not making the best use of of what I'm doing at this point, especially when you're not really sure what you want to do, but you know that this is not what I want to do, and I better change some gears. So business, economics, and a business background, I thought was the better option, because it gives you enough of a base and a foundation where you can go to any field sort of you want, as long as you have that good business background.
Mm. No, and I think that makes sense. And so, and it's always one of those where I first of all, I think that, education in general, even if it's one where you may not anticipate, being or using it later on, or just or shift, I think you always use that as a leverage for whatever you do throughout your career. Now, so you decided to switch, you went over to economics, got into business. And as you're graduating, I believe you mentioned that during some of the school years, you worked with your dad before deciding to go do an MBA as well as getting a law degree. Is that right?
Well, at one point, once I graduated school, I started working. My father always wanted me to work with him, but I really wanted to sort of venture out and learn what's going on out in the real world, because when you're working for your family, you're still sort of like in a little cocoon. And in any event, I think if you grow up in a family business, I think it's always best
Hmm.
to work outside of that business so that you understand the working world. That's sometimes more reality than your family business. But if you want to go back, that's fine. But I think at the beginning, it's always a good idea. So I worked for some financial firms for a couple of years. While I was doing that, I said, let me get my MBA degree. And so I did that part-time. And while I was working, for other financial firms, at the time I was working for Dean Witter Reynolds down at the World Trade Center in commodities. So I sort of start to get my feet wet there.
Hmm.
So once I finished my MBA, my dad was again, oh, why don't come work with the family? And so I thought it was like, there's that line in The Godfather where he goes, every time I try to get out, they pull me
They
back
pulled me
in.
back in.
And I didn't want to have this thing over my head where, I wanted to have apart from the fact that I always probably knew that I'd be working with my dad. I wanted to have a piece of paper. I wanted to be sort of independent in that sense. So the next best thing from being a doctor was, let me go to law school. So I went to law school. I came back to New York and passed my bar, and I worked for a couple of law firms for a couple of years. And then again, there was again that thing like my dad's like, come back. So in any event, I did go back and working with a family because at that time I had always been working with my dad because we were in the food business. And then we started branching out into real estate and real estate development. And so, while there was a lot of legal stuff that I was working with my dad initially, after a while, it felt like a natural, continuation. And so, we started in the real estate business, and then over time, we started working on, we opened up our first hotel in 2000 on the Broadway Plaza Hotel. And then we just continued on that trajectory of real estate and hotel management. And so, so that was the course that took me on that road.
So now you say, okay, so you go get all your degrees, family keeps pulling you back in. And then in the meantime, I think you also mentioned you got married and had a couple kids. And as you're
Yes.
having those couple kids, as those kids are now growing up, you hadn't really ever gotten to sports, but the kids started to, and you started to support them in their sports. And that kind of set your trajectory on a bit of a different path, which is kind of more what you're doing today. So how did that take place, or how did that occur?
So, so I have two sons, and initially, I recognized the benefit of sports, even though I didn't play sports. I recognize the benefits, from many different levels. And so I always encourage kids, I had them in baseball and basketball and, taekwondo and the whole big thing. And I had my kids taking tennis lessons at a very young age. I never played tennis, but I loved the sport. I loved watching it. And I thought tennis was the one sport that really pushed you to your limits from a mental, physical, and emotional side out of all of the sports. And so, but for some reason, they were pretty good, but they just gravitated towards baseball. And so I think they liked the team sports rather than, tennis, which is pretty much, you're relying on yourself. So in any event, my oldest son, Peter, was a great baseball player. He had high baseball IQ. He understood this game because he was hearing impaired. His visuals were heightened. And so he was looking at movement in this sport. And so he's able to pick up the nuances of players and anticipating what they were going to do. And so he was a very, very good ball player. And so unfortunately, at the time when he was 12 years old, he was diagnosed with a rare form of childhood cancer, which thankfully at the time and still today, it was a non-Hodgkin's form of lymphoma. And there was a protocol that had a very, very high rate, almost like an 85, 90% recovery, fully curable rate for children. And so in any event, thankfully, he did recover and he was fully cured. But, that was after like 6 rounds of chemo, and he had some surgery. So in any event, he was just, he was at a point where, it took a while to recover. But along those lines, all throughout that period, and actually his protocols and the times that he was taking the chemo, everything was going like clockwork. It was like he was strong. It was like, it was to the book. And so the whole time he was like, Dad, I got to get back on the field. I got to get back on the field. And then once he was at a point to recover, I'm looking at this kid, and he's just, he's skinny, he's scrawny. I'm like, Peter, I don't know if this is going to be, and he's like, no, I got to get back. And so in any event, as any father, at that point, what are you going to do? You do your best to try and help your son recover. So in any event, I started looking at human movement in sports, and I'm looking at it through a different window, so to speak. And I'm looking at what what appears to be, especially those type of sports that use a dominant or predominant side, both in practice and in the sport. Like, I mean, forget about switch hitters, but hitters and pitchers and football quarterbacks and football kickers and golfers, tennis players. So recognizing, that most have a dominant side or predominant side that they're using over time, and the way they practice in the terms of repetition, I thought that this was kind of, it didn't make sense to me. Like, how sports is a very dynamic system of movement, and you have to be prepared for anything. And so the practice is sort of very static in nature. It's repetition, doing things a million times, and one-sided training, which creates asymmetrical, adaptations for the body. And so sometimes those asymmetrical adaptations can create injury. And so in any event, that's how my company Robosport was born. And we started with developing and patenting a robotic batting tee, which prevents you from hitting the ball in the same consecutive spot. And so it now turns from, it flips the paradigm from repetition to randomization. And number two, we encourage utilizing both sides of your body. So if you're a right-handed batter and you finish on your right side, we want you to go to your left, not to make you a switch hitter, but to make you a better right-handed hitter, because now we're opening up the other side of your brain, and hopefully that creates better communication between the brain, within the brain, and between the brain and the body.
No, that's awesome. So now as you're doing that, you've got, a difference between, you're doing the robotics, you're building that up, you're, improving that. Now, as you try and now build a business around that, and, not only create the product, but create everything else, as you're going through that, how is it building a business around that? Or, what was it like?
So, well, first of all, the process that got me, I'll go back now to to my high school days and to my college days, and all of that science knowledge that I had, and how science works, and how, the scientific method, that really came in handy now, because I'm able to read the science that's already out there on studies that have been done on randomization in other fields, and opposite side training. And so I'm able to sort of now understand and read those articles in those peer-reviewed journals. Number two, I recognized that we needed to do some studies. And so I was very fortunate to meet Dr. Jacob Wilson, who is the CEO of the Applied Science and Performance Institute in Tampa. They got a huge facility. They work with all levels of athletes, and they have equipment there that's just crazy. And in any event, I asked him, we needed to do some studies in combining both, the opposite side training with the randomization. So the science background helped me to try to now understand what we're trying to do here with respect to connecting neuromotor connection. So I don't have to be a neurologist. I don't have to be a neuromotor expert, but I'm able, I think, because of the way I researched it, I think I could hang with any one of those neuromotor scientists and have an intelligent conversation with them as well. So that came in handy. And I think then from the business side, the business aspect of putting a business together, in real estate and hotel and in general, helped me to structure a business now in sports training technology, so to speak. And so that again came in handy. So I was talking about, it all sort of came in full circle. The only thing is that, I'm entering into a field where I'm not, there are a lot of nuances in the technology world that I'm not familiar with. When I first started talking to people about about the business and this concept, the first thing was trying to make them understand the concept, because they're just not familiar with certain scientific concepts that this is trying to create. And number two, when you're talking about the business, they're like, okay, what's your exit strategy? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not exiting anything. I'm trying to get a company off the ground, and you're talking about an exit. So, there's things about the industry, the technology industry itself, and the startup industry, which I was not familiar with, which I had to sort of, familiarize and learn as well.
No, makes sense. So now, as you've had, and I think you built a few companies or spun off or kind of pursue different things, but give everybody kind of an idea, kind of where is everything at today as far as the companies, is it things are out in the marketplace, people can purchase things, this is for professionals, kind of where's the business at and how's it gone?
So with Robosport Technologies, what happened is that, as you go through this process, and I think, when you start to, open up some doors or you start to peer through windows that no one's looked at before, you're like, wow, this whole new methodology now opens up a whole new way of training. And now you're like, wow, it creates new products, so to speak, that were never created before, because you are looking at through a whole new way of looking at sports training. And so what I did was I started patenting, things that we could utilize in wearable technology and augmented reality. And I spent some time, we have over 10 patents that are approved in the US that covers all of that. And a couple now that we decided to file application are pending in Japan. So I wanted to secure the space as best I could before actually creating the technology. So with the robotic tee, which is our launch product, we built a prototype, and right now we're looking for funding to develop the fully engineered product for manufacture. And so we started a social media campaign to get people interested and hopefully, create some demand generation to show that there is some demand for the product, for investors to come in. So with respect to what happened is that as I'm looking at athletes, and I think they understand the randomization, high level athletes, I think are and athletes in general, they're very resistant to, like, why am I going to work my opposite side? I'm not going to use it. But they're looking at it from a motor muscular perspective, but they're not looking at it from a neurological perspective, is that when you go to your opposite side, you're opening up the other side of your brain. And what that does is that connects to more muscle and muscle fiber, so that when you go back to your dominant side, your motion will be more accurate and precise. But in any event, given that it was very difficult, I also recognize that these athletes, when they're working with their trainers or they're working in the gym, they're trying to compensate for the one-sided training by just training unilaterally on the opposite side. But the problem with that is that it gets negated when you go back to your practice. And so in any event, I stumbled onto this concept of offset loading, which is working in a bilateral way, different weights on each side. So what happens is that it's forcing the weaker side to work harder than the stronger side. And additionally, it's utilizing stabilizing muscle groups with different pathways in the brain. And in any event, I think it's a more efficient way of working out and keeping your body symmetrical and as an injury prevention mechanism. So we filed some more patents on different on new types of weight resistance machines that now would be incorporated with software, sort of like a virtual trainer that would incorporate offset loading practice with
Awesome.
your traditional side. So
No, I think it sounds like a lot of or fun and ongoing innovation, a lot of things that you guys are breaking ground on. So that's definitely exciting. So, well, with that, now as we kind of catch up to the present day of your journey, and it's always a great time to transition to the two questions I always ask at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to those now. The first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? What'd you learn from it?
I think, when I started out trying to um, find a company that would work with me to help me develop this product concept of this robotic tea that I had in my head. And I think what I did incorrectly was I started going out to robotics companies. And so a lot of these robotic, because I thought, it's sort of like a robot. So why can't I, let me reach out to a robotics company that maybe can help me engineer this product. And I think that was a mistake because robotics companies, even till this day, sometimes are focused on more industrial robots, for assembly lines and telerobots and stuff that's actually needed, but not for consumer products. And so it wasn't until I found a company out in California that is a consumer product development company that just also works with robotics. And so I spent a lot of time searching robotics companies, and I did some early prototypes, which, were not what I had was anticipating. But I think, was it a huge blunder? No, but I wish I would have started with the consumer products development company, because it would have probably saved me a lot of time and money and energy. But in any event, everything is an experience. So, yeah.
No, and it's always interesting, when you start out with the business, you think, oh, here's my perfect customer, my target consumer, the people I'm going to go out and sell to. And sometimes you hit that right on, and other times you find out, hey, they aren't my target audience, or they're going to be the ones that are going to be receptive. But this other audience over here fits much better and, much more in line with what we're doing. So it's always kind of one of those where sometimes you have to make those mistakes of who isn't your audience to find out who it is. So I think that's a great mistake to learn from, and one that definitely is easy to make. Second question I always ask is, now if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Well, if you're, whatever product you're creating, whether it's software or hardware, or I think it's important to try to develop that early prototype as quickly as you can. And because I think at the beginning, while that's where my focus was, I was spending money on, marketing validation studies and a lot of other things that could have waited. But I think if I had spent the money more on trying to just develop that early prototype, and not worry about, the website or a lot of other things, that I would have utilized the money more efficiently. And, but I don't try to do too much at once. And I think the second thing is what you just mentioned. You need to be open, because the journey and the process of developing a company, you're going to learn. And so you need to also be, as I'm trying to teach athletes, to be adaptable to change on a dynamic environment. So as a business person, you need to be adaptable to change, and don't always be too headstrong. Sometimes, you have to be a little bit headstrong, because you sometimes a lot of people are not going to believe in you or what you're doing. In that manner, you do, but where listen to the advice of others and take that where you feel it needs to be incorporated. Don't be too closed in that regard.
No, I think that's definitely a great takeaway and a great piece of advice. So Well, now as we kind of wrap up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an investor as you're in closing your round and the continuing or that ongoing process, or they just want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
So you can reach me at sal@robosporttechnologies.com. That's with two T's. We're on Instagram at Robosport Technologies. We're on Facebook. And you can go to our website at robosporttechnologies.com, and you can read about our upcoming product lines, our research. We have 2 articles that were published in the Journal of Sport and Human Performance. So we have some legit science behind us. And, you can find out more information there. You can contact us through our website and through Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to reach out, connect up, and support a great mission. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners that would like to be a guest on the podcast, we'd love to have you. So just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. A couple more things as listeners, make sure to click share, subscribe, leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup or your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Sal, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Devin, for having me, and the best to you as well.